Good evening. I'm very happy that you was able to join me. I'd like to welcome all the friends, and I'm not going to refer to an audience, but friends from Anchorage and from Colorado Springs, and also my guest Jim Clarkston that I accidentally ran into a few years ago. Welcome to Olympia, and thank you for giving us this exclusive interview here. The reason today is somewhat special is because it is December the 21st and it's a winter solstice, and I have a little problem with some of these big words like equinoxes and solstices. And what happened today actually was the sun and the moon, the sun and the earth is aligned in a straight line, which creates an equator in
across the galaxy?
No, I can. It's a galactic equator in the Milky Way. Here we go. And so that hasn't happened in 6,500 years, so it's a very special day. And it's also snowing like crazy, so did you have a nice trip to come up here?
It was a bit of an ordeal, Lillian, but it was more than worth it. And to be honest, every time I've met you, it's always been an extraordinary experience for me because you've helped open my eyes to a different way of seeing the universe, and that's really important to me because my regular background is a bit more conservative and narrow, and you've helped broaden my perspective.
So all you needed was one person of high strangeness, yes?
Exactly.
Okay.
You've been the catalyst for a lot of change.
Yeah. So what I thought I would like to do instead of eventually interrupt you, I want to chit-chat with you a little bit, and then when you get ready to share your presentation with us, I'm not going to interrupt you at all. Like to refresh your memory about a spear that I have. Do you remember that?
Oh, I remember it quite vividly.
Yeah. Well, what happened, I was up in Anchorage at one time, and on a day much like this, it was snowing, and my friend Monica and I, we would just drive around, looking at the city. And we ended up at a beach shop. And as soon as I got into this beach shop, I knew there was something there that I needed, so to speak. Well, we looked at all the beads and all the baskets, and the lady kept saying, well, what is it you need? And I said, lady, I don't know, but whatever it is it's from Africa. And she says, oh, I know what that is. And she goes to the back, and going back a little bit, I always knew I needed a spear at one time or another, okay? And she said, there is a spear back here on consignment. So of course I bought it, and buying it was the easy part. We had to put it on a plane to go to Seattle, So we eventually found somebody to wrap it all up, and when I got to Seattle, it had worked its way all the way out of the box. And actually it was a spring solace, remember?
That's right.
And I brought it and I showed it off, and you said, I know what that is. And so if you'd like to share. And
well, I believe, based upon my knowledge of military weapons and history, that this is a lion hunting spear.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that it's significant is that this is one of the bravest ways to hunt a very fearsome and dangerous animal. And you have to have absolutely perfect timing. You have to be in the right place at the right time. And if you make a mistake, it will certainly be your last. By that I mean you have to get the lion to spring on you. And the goal of using a double-ended spear to kill the lion is that at the last possible moment, you dig one point into the earth, you hold the other point out, and you pray that you have it pointed at the lion's heart so that it will stop beating before he mauls you to death after he's impaled on the spear. So needless to say, there probably aren't too many amateur lion hunters who use this spear. They would all be experts if they were around to tell about it.
Yeah, so that kind of symbolizes my life in the last 8-9 years, being in the right place at the right time, and make sure you don't stick it in the wrong place. So thank you for sharing that with me. And so I'm going to put that back here before we hurt ourselves. Now, and you live in Aberdeen?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Would you like to share how we met, maybe?
I think that would be a great story. As I recall, the first time that I ever saw you was August 20th of 1996. And I have to back up a little bit or the people listening won't understand how we met. I'm a state section director with the Mutual UFO Network, which is an organization of over 5,000 members in the United States, and the membership is continually growing. All of the people in MUFON, or the Mutual UFO Network, are volunteers. And in other words, we all do something else to earn our paychecks, but we have this abiding love at getting to the bottom of the mystery of unidentified flying objects. And in my own case, I'm now 47 years old, and I knew when I was probably 13 or 14 that this was something I had to do. And ever since then, I've been collecting articles, books, anything I could lay my hands on related to UFOs. I've always been more interested in that than anything else. In the meantime, of course, I'm also a law enforcement officer, which may seem a little bit odd, the two of them fitting together, but I hope that by the time we're done with these programs, that it will be very obvious as to how one serves the other. In any event, I was sent, as I recall, based upon information that I received from the directors, Larry and Marilyn Childs in Seattle, and also information that I received from Peter Davenport at the National UFO Reporting Center, which is also located in Seattle.
In Seattle. Yeah.
And I don't remember at this time who called them, but in any event, I was told that I needed to contact this family that lived up the Wainuchi Valley. And it was a very interesting place because they were very interesting people in and of themselves, and I'm not sure that they would necessarily want me to identify them. They seem to be fairly private people.
Yeah, no, we don't have
But
to
they
do that. Yeah.
have a very unique livelihood. They raise these gorgeous fish called koi, and they have 60 ponds where they live, and each pond is probably 25 by 30 feet and about 10 to 12 feet deep, and there's approximately a dozen to 20 koi in each one of these ponds. And what had occurred that caused them to call the National UFO Reporting Center was that 3 women were standing out in back of the house, and this house overlooks a large open expanse that leads to the forest. And this was late in the evening, as I recall.
About 11 o'clock.
About 11 o'clock, and everything became very, very quiet. And they were talking about how quiet it had become, and then all at once, a glowing sphere rose up off the back lawn. And it was, my understanding of it was almost like it had the motor running and it was sitting there in the dark with the lights out.
Well, I was there. I tell you what it did.
Okay,
It
that's
was
even better.
lights on, lift off, over and out. That's what it did. And it just happened that quick.
And I was, as I recall, one woman was standing there in shock. You almost fell off the porch.
I wanted to catch it because I figured now I can prove it. So it was not very smart because I could have fell off the balcony, but here was my chance. I was just going to catch it, yeah.
And the lady of the house ran through the house as fast as she could and went out the front door just in time to see it go streaking off into the distance. And the interesting thing was there were also multiple sightings of fireballs and spheres throughout the Northwest that night.
Yeah.
In any event, at what point?
Well, we called UFO Reporting Center, and they in turn contacted you to Miss Childs. And then, of course, I had to go back to that location, and then here you came.
Exactly.
And that's how we met.
And we went to the pond, too. That was a very important element of this case, was that out of these 60 ponds, the pond that was closest to the point where the sphere arose up out of this huge back lawn area, that pond turned a very deep, ugly, rust-red brown color, and all of the koi fish died overnight in that pond, and no other pond was affected by whatever this was. I can't say absolutely for sure that the sighting of the sphere was directly connected with the death of the fish, but we've come up with no other plausible explanation since.
A lot of coincidences here.
Exactly.
Yeah, so we've kept in touch ever since. We have a lot of mutual friends that we'll talk about later.
Exactly.
Daryl Sims, for instance.
The alien hunter.
The alien hunter, yes, and hopefully he's going to do a show when he's in town, because we're going to have a lot of local people that is very much involved in things, and every once in a while we will have one not so local person. And Daryl, of course, would be one of those.
Yes, I believe he lives in Texas.
Yes, I'm in Texas when he's not traveling. He was just in Eastern Europe for a little while. And so, well, anyway, you brought a lot of goodies here, so let's see what you have.
Well, yes, I did.
Yeah.
And I guess where I need to go with this is to sort of tell the very end so that everyone will understand all the steps along the way.
Oh, it's like me. I do everything backwards, so.
I thought about
good,
that, and I
good.
decided that that was the approach we should take.
Yeah.
This show is dedicated to a dear friend of mine named June Caba, who died this year on August 23rd at the age of 73. And she had had a long bout with cancer, and when I met her, she was in remission. I originally met her 5 years ago, and I was doing a lecture at Ocean Shores, and she came up to me after my lecture, and she started telling me little bits and pieces of her life story. And I was so intrigued that I asked her if I could interview her and go forward. And at that time, she didn't want to be interviewed, and she told me that someday, you know, when the time was right, she would contact me. And that turned out not to be until the 50th anniversary of the crash at Roswell, which was in July 4th of 1997, 50 years after the event. And she called me out of the blue. I didn't expect this at all. And she said that she was ready to tell her story because she was so angry at the government for their third final explanation of what crashed near that small desert town so many years ago. And she said, I remember it quite vividly, she said, what are they going to do? Put me in prison or shoot me? I can do either one.
Yeah.
And so today, this show is going to be dedicated to her because I have two documents with me which sort of go right to the heart of what it is that I'm trying to present. And I have a document that's a copy of Notification of Personnel Action. And this has a War Department seal on the top. This, of course, is a photocopy. I have the original papers stored away. And this talks about June M. Crane, confirmation of war service appointment, indefinite, dated July 3rd, 1942, Wright Field, Ohio. I have numerous other documents that trace her work history that would prove conclusively where she worked. And that sets the backdrop for one of the most extraordinary stories that I've ever heard.
So if we see you on the milk carton, we know what happened to you, right?
Right, I'm now missing.
Yeah.
Hopefully I won't be. And it turns out, just today, I was contacted by a man named Ryan Wood down in San Francisco Bay Area. He's very interested in getting the June story because it turns out to be the foundation of a still more important revelation. Yeah. A man named Joe Firmage has put over $2 million of his own money into trying to bring to light the truth of a large collection of documents. And these documents have been known to the UFO research community for the last 2 years. Only a few UFO researchers, the very top people. And approximately a week and a half ago on Art Bell, they made an extraordinary disclosure. And I will state right up front, some people kind of turn their head and look away if you mention Art Bell. And all I will say about him is, I do not believe everybody who is on his show, nor do I believe everything that's presented there. But it's a very important forum for new and radical ideas. And this is how I first heard of these documents. Because I was listening that night, I knew that I needed these documents. I knew immediately how important the June story was. And I knew that all of this would somehow work together. And that became an even more remarkable series of synchronistic coincidences that have led us to being here today, that led me to appear at a MUFON meeting in Seattle when I'd been unable to attend for over 2 years because of work and children and all those things. I went to that one meeting, and I met a man there who in turn emailed Daryl Sims, who has since contacted me because he has more information that may help all of this fit together. And what is the point of all this, and why is this so important? And why should it be important to a small town policeman? Well, because this is, I believe, important to everybody. We may be on the verge of proving that we are not alone, that we have not been alone all along. This has just been an illusion that we've lived under. And one of the ways that we're going to prove that is that we're going to use the documents that have been obtained from our own government. And what I have in my hand is a document that's called Extraterrestrial Entities and Technology, Recoveries and Disposal, Top Secret, Magic, Eyes Only, the highest level of security classification that there is. This level of security classification is so far above top secret that I would doubt very seriously that even the President of the United States is currently privy to all of this information. And I know that sounds like an extraordinary claim. A man named Carl Sagan, who was greatly opposed to anything that you and I believe in or are interested in, he said that extraordinary claims demand extraordinary proof. And I guess what I hope to present here to support these documents, to support the June story, is that we have that extraordinary proof. It's all around us all the time. All we have to do is just open our eyes and take a look.
Let me help you with that.
Certainly. And I guess by way of a little bit of background, which I alluded to, I should just let you know that I've been in the Mutual UFO Network for 10 years. I've been a state section director for most all of that. I'm also a field investigator because there aren't that many MUFON members where I live, so I have to wear multiple hats. And as I mentioned, I am a law enforcement officer. I'm also a family man. I have 19 years with the police department where I work now in a city in Grays Harbor County. I'm in charge of the fatal accident team. I've been a detective sergeant. I'm currently a patrol sergeant. I'm also a veteran. I've been a military policeman with the U.S. Army.
So in short, it's hard to pull the wool over your eyes.
I believe that it would be very hard to do in the long run. And the only reason I say that is not to sing my own praises, but to establish my credibility, that I don't say these things lightly. It took me a long time to get to know June, and if you knew June, you would know that this is the kind of woman who everything she told you, she believed with all of her heart, and if you didn't believe it, that was just tough.
I remember I saw you, I believe in Ocean Shores, before I took my trip, when I wrote my book, and you had just met her, and you made mention about this wonderful woman that really didn't care whether anybody believed her or not. And then I think when you finally did meet her, I was at the Hopi Reservation, and as I left there, I'm coming to Arizona, and they said, did you come from Roswell? And I said, no. And they said, well, good, you don't look like a conehead, because I have crop circles all over the RV, so I never did get to meet the lady, unfortunately. So.
That's true, and I know that you two would have developed a close relationship because you would have had a lot in common.
But she really built you up for this grand finale, I think.
Yes, she did.
That was wonderful, yeah.
And she gave me all of her papers. She was serious enough about her story that she even had her attorney draw up a letter telling me that I was to be the person to tell her story and that she did want these things known. I think she was worried somehow that maybe her family would object or whatever. But we are going forward with this, and her story will be told as part of the larger disclosure of these majestic 12 documents.
Okay. I understand you brought slides. Would we want to go into the slides now? Or?
We would, but I would like to go into a bit more background.
Okay, go right ahead. I'm just going to give you the floor here.
Because one of the things that I thought about was, well, these tapes may be used by all kinds of different people. And some of them may not have a lengthy background in
Yeah.
the investigation of UFOs or an understanding of what's going on. So I want to rapidly cover some basic material so that whoever watches this, whether they are a person who is an adept at this subject or a newcomer, they can get to the level that we're at and understand what's going on right now in the field of ufology, because this is probably the most exciting time to be involved in it.
It is, yeah. Good times to live in.
Exactly. Peter Davenport, the National UFO Reporting Center in Seattle, announced last week that in the space of 20 days, that would be the very end of November and the very beginning of December of this year, 1998, there were 1,200 reported UFO sightings to the center in 20 days, which is far more than he and his short staff and their limited budget can handle.
I filmed something over my daughter's house on one day after Thanksgiving, and I did not report that, so we can add that.
We can make that
Because I did
1,201.
Because I did show it.
Is that videotape?
Yes,
Well, that was an extraordinary event,
Yeah.
and certainly one that I wished I could have been there for.
Yeah.
I guess the real question is, what is a UFO? In other words, we have to start somewhere and decide what is it that we're talking about, an unidentified flying object. And too often, that's become like a loaded phrase. And you mention UFO, and people in the news media, they turn off, and people in the military shrug their shoulders and turn away. Some people think that UFOs are like nuts and bolts spacecraft, and other people look upon it as a religious experience, or the encounters with UFOs as being a doorway into the deepest realms of the universe. Some people consider it to be a fable. There are still other groups that will tell you that UFOs are nothing more than odd weather or hallucinations. I think in order to understand at all what's happening around us, and this is something I started learning from you, and it turns out that we've gone so far that now science and mysticism have met themselves somewhere in the middle. We don't live in a four-dimensional reality.
Yeah, that's really important, because in my circles, people always want to take that apart, and it really isn't. It is all part of the same thing, you know.
Exactly.
And as time goes on, hopefully with this new awakening, we will realize that. Yeah.
I do not pretend to be a mathematician or a physicist, but in the process of studying UFOs, I've read an awful lot of books and plowed my way through some quantum physics books, even though I didn't understand all the math, trying to understand some of the ideas. And fortunately, there are some people who've done it for us. One of them was a man named Michael Talbot, and one of the books that he wrote is extraordinary, called The Holographic Mind. And he talks about how, in order for the fundamental equations of quantum physics to be true, in order for all the quarks and neutrinos and mesons and all these little hypothetical particles that no one can see exactly, but they're sure that they have to be there because they're some part of the fundamental fabric of the universe, in order for all of these things to do what they do, we live in a 10-dimensional universe. And at that level, things do not operate the way they normally do. One thing can be in two places at once. Information can be communicated instantaneously from one part of the universe to the other. In many instances, the information is not so much communicated as it's already there. That's the concept of the hologram, that the whole is always in the smallest part, and vice versa. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts, and also each individual part contains the pattern of something much larger. And it's for that reason, aside from putting some scale on everything, that I think some of the slides that I'm going to show later are very, very important, because you can see at a macroscopic level, looking out into the universe, some of the same things that you see under a microscope in the smallest drop of water. And when we start looking at the universe as circles and has greater and greater levels of reality and as different dimensions, we're not stuck in this little linear box that says that we're all alone and that the Earth is a tiny little speck of dust way out on the edge of the Milky Way by a star that turns out to be pretty run-of-the-mill and like 90% of all the other stars that are in the sky. And instead we find that the universe is filled with energy and light and particles and dimensions, and I believe, I've come to the conclusion, beings of various types that exist at different levels. I can't necessarily prove their existence to you. Some of this is not a question of proof as much as it is coming to an understanding.
Yeah, it's a knowing. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a personal transformation. One of the things that I've learned along the way that has been valuable to me, one of the reasons that I pursue this mystery is, I guess it's like the alchemists who were looking for the philosopher's stone that would take lead and turn it into gold. Well, the real truth of the matter is that's not what the alchemist was looking for. The act of finding the philosopher's stone changed the alchemist and gave him the most intimate possible understanding of the universe. And that made him into a shaman or a sorcerer or whatever you want to call him, an enlightened being. And that's kind of far afield from where I want to go, but that's just to explain some personal perspectives, and that also explains why I've put such a high value on knowing you and trying to understand as much as I can about how you view the universe.
You got a general idea? Good for you, because half of the time I don't know how universe. I just make it up as I go along.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I want to make sure that everybody understands, I guess if I was going to say what's the one thing, whoever views this tape, if they're going to listen to me and say that man knows something about UFOs, what do I want them to take with them? I want you to remember the fact that there is one high-quality UFO event somewhere in the world every single hour of every single day. The only problem is very few of them get reported. It's not, and reality is not defined by CNN. I'm sorry to tell people that, but that's just the way it is. The fact that it's not on the nightly news doesn't mean that it didn't happen. And a perfect example of that is back in, I believe, 1991 through 1993, and even to this day, to a certain extent, in the central corridor of Mexico, over cities that have, some of them have 1 million or 2 million population, they had daily overflights of UFOs. Some of the UFO researchers, the last one I saw, he had collected over 5,000 videotapes of broad daylight UFO sightings. That staggers the imagination. I've seen some of these videotapes. Why this never was reported north of the border is almost a stranger story than the event itself. Because it says an awful lot about how we are manipulated in our knowledge of our place in the universe.
Yeah, here's another thought that I just had. It's like when we see something new, it's exciting, you know? And then once we get used to it, it just kind of gets lost. So I think more people than normal see things and they just got used to it and they don't see it anymore. Like for instance, where we were up at the Vainucci, one of the questions somebody asked said, well, then what did you do? Well, it was over, we went to bed. It was a big thing, but it was just, it happened all the time.
Right, what could you do? You couldn't find it.
So what else was there to do? Yeah, so.
That's right. There have been an estimated probably 40,000 cases of UFOs reported since approximately 1947. Using statistical projection, that means that there's probably actually about 15 million cases. And of course, we all know that statistics can be used to prove almost anything, but what I'm trying to do is to just give people an idea of where this is all going. A man named Ted Phillips has collected over 4,000 physical trace cases. And that's a case where a UFO has been seen. There was some physical interaction with the environment where it was observed, and there was some kind of documentable evidence left behind that could be photographed, analyzed, collected, put away, and systematically recorded. Now, of course, this is of interest to me as an investigator because that's exactly what I do. And this is how the two things begin to become one. I use exactly the same techniques to investigate a UFO sighting that I would conducting a criminal investigation. And the truth of the matter is, once you learn to be an investigator, you can investigate anything because you're doing the same things over and over again. You interview witnesses. You use your people skills to interact with them and to get them to cooperate with you. You try and assess their credibility. You try to take what they've told you and put it into some kind of larger perspective so that it makes sense. And you try and back it up with physical evidence and photographs. And you take all of that and you put it together into a report form so that someone else who doesn't know anything about the event that you're investigating can come back and reconstruct everything you've done. Now there, in a nutshell, is my 30-second explanation of how you investigate anything. It takes someone with logic, it takes someone with people skills, and it takes someone with curiosity and an open mind.
And a hunch.
And a
Don't
hunch.
forget the hunch.
Right.
Yeah.
That's, of course, women call it women's intuition, and macho men are supposed to call it gut instinct.
Instinct.
I have a gut instinct. Well, there are a lot of things going on right now that are really peculiar. And we're told one thing. We're told that UFOs don't exist. We're told that the Roswell crash was nothing more than Project Mogul. And then, of course, they had to come up with a real quick explanation for the 50th year anniversary. So they had someone drop a dummy off of a balloon, and that was supposed to be the explanation for how all of this occurred and how all these people got so excited and why they had the military inside the town of Roswell and why people were intimidated into silence and why there's been an ongoing cover-up for so many years. We're told that none of this is real. It's all mere science fiction. It's just something that we make up. Well, I'd like to give you a couple of ideas of some very odd things that are going on. Somebody gave this to me, and I thought at first they were trying to test my credibility. This is called the Fire Officer's Guide to Disaster Control. This is a photocopy of the front cover, and within this document, I photocopied a particular chapter. Now, why is this important? This is a textbook.
I remember when you brought that to my attention.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I thought that was really awesome that it
It
would
is.
be in this
It's
textbook.
mind-boggling.
Yeah.
The book is written by William M. Kramer, PhD, District Fire Chief, Cincinnati Fire Division, Director of Fire Science, University of Cincinnati, co-authored with Charles W. Boehm, Juris Doctorate, Deputy Fire Chief, LA Fire Department, retired, Captain, United States Naval Reserve, retired, and attorney at law. Now, these are two guys that obviously are going to spend a lot of time perpetrating hoaxes. Well, you look at this book, and I did. I went to my local Timberland library, and I made them get me the book. And they did, very quickly, and I brought it home, and it was a nice-looking textbook. I even called the publisher and priced it. It was about a better part of $60. It was in its second edition and probably headed for its third. And it has a lot of chapters inside that were things that you would normally expect. There's chapters on fire and flood and earthquake and how to set up a command center and how to marshal your resources in the event of an emergency to take care of sick and injured people. All perfectly logical topics, and a lot of it pretty much dry as dust unless you were involved in that particular line of work. And this is a textbook that is actually used. I went to my local fire chief and I asked him about these two gentlemen, William Kramer and Charles W. Boehm. I asked him if he'd heard of this book.
I remember that.
He had, and he said that these are two highly respected authorities in the field. So then I look through the table of contents and everything seems pretty good. And I get down to chapter 13, and I can't help but think that, using the number 13, somebody had a sense of humor. Chapter 13 is called Enemy Attack and the UFO Potential. Now that kind of threw me. And I went through the chapter, and we see what is war, causes of war, effects of a nuclear attack, That seems pretty sensible. World War II nuclear attacks, preparation for enemy attack, fire department preparation general. Okay, that's all well and good, but it's the last half of the chapter that really gets to me. The UFO threat, a fact. Adverse potential of UFOs. UFOs, emergency action, conclusion, and references. This blew me away because if you read this chapter, you get a good short course in UFOs like what we're trying to do here today.
Yeah.
Now, why are two people like that talking about it if none of this is real and it isn't happening? Just the other day, one of the administrators at the department where I work, he brought me an advertisement. And I looked at this thing. It's something they send to captains and chiefs to try and get people interested in, training exercises to help develop their skills as administrators. And it's got a nice cover. It says training ideas, resource guide, and product catalog. And I go along in this, and it's got all of these interesting little things that you can buy where you can act out scenarios. And it has one called the Alien Encounter Exercise. Comes with videotape. And it says, dramatizes key elements of the communication process, develops effective decision-making skills, builds understanding and strengthens team interaction, and increases intercultural awareness and sensitivity. I should hope so. But they're selling this to people. We're being acclimated. There's a very strong argument that over time, we are being deliberately accustomed to the idea of alien contact. We're being softened up.
Well, look at all the commercials in the last few years, Everything was alien. That's why I'm playing with this.
Oh, yes.
And it gets so people see something. And I find it in my travels, and they spot things out of the corner of the eye, and it's just an alien. They just keep going because they're so used to it, you see. Yeah.
Well, it gets even better because it turns out that one of the best sources of documentation for the whole UFO phenomena is through the Freedom of Information Act.
Yeah.
And that's been an incredible tool that has benefited every UFO researcher, because what we've done, there's an old phrase about hoisting someone on their own petard. I guess that's like impaling them on the lion spear. And that's what the UFO investigators have attempted to do, because we've taken their own documents and turned them back on them. The Freedom of Information Act, for those people who are not aware of it, allows every citizen in the United States to ask for any federal document, providing that they can't put a heading of national security on it.
Mm-hmm.
And the UFO researchers, as soon as this law was passed, they jumped on it and they said, well, we need to get involved. This Freedom of Information Act is a great opportunity. So they asked the FBI. They said, FBI, we want all the documents that you have on the subject of UFOs. And the FBI said, that's ridiculous. We've never investigated UFOs. We're not involved in UFOs. How can you possibly suggest such a thing? Well, the result was 1,800 pages of the FBI not being involved in UFOs. And of course, they, in the process of not being involved in UFOs for 1,800 pages, it turned out that this non-involvement, they were also partnered up with their buddies across the way at the CIA. And the CIA, they turned out about 800 or 900 pages of not being involved in UFOs, and they went through the same process. And eventually, they got a whole series, this alphabet soup of agencies that nobody even knew existed. The National Security Agency, a lot of people knew about that, but they ended up coming up with agencies like DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Projects Administration. There's the Defense Intelligence Directorate. There's, you name it, a whole alphabet soup of black budget agencies. And in fact, there's an excellent book by Tim Weiner called Blank Check that talks about black budget funding and how every year when they start debating the budget and talking about how the tax money is going to be spent and whether or not they're actually going to balance the budget, in all reality, there's a whole big section of it that's like an iceberg floating under the water, and that's black budget funding. So you can add another half or even more to whatever the national budget is, that's the real amount of money they're spending. And black budget means that they are not accountable to anyone other than people who are already within their own group. And all intelligence agencies work off of two principles. You have to have a clearance to have access to a particular level of information, and secondly, you have to have a need to know. Well, the end product of all this, I want to show a book here that's called, I tried to think, what would the two most important UFO books be? If my house was burning down and I had to drag two UFO books outside with me, what would they be? Well, one of them would be this book called Clear Intent, The Government Cover-Up of the UFO Evidence by Lawrence Fawcett and Barry Greenwood. And one of these two gentlemen is also a retired cop, so I guess that's why I have a little bit of affinity. But the beauty of this book is that it's completely documented and footnoted. And what is it documented and footnoted with? Documents that were obtained from our own government through the Freedom of Information Act.
I see, it looks like the yellow pages. You wrote all through it, so
Oh, yes.
I guess you can't leave with home without it, huh?
No, this is a very, very important book.
Yeah.
And there are stories in here that will make the hair stand up on the back of your neck. Things that absolutely boggled my mind. I could not believe that I was getting that kind of a UFO story from an unimpeachable source. That's what's staggering. See, the information is all around there. We're told that it isn't true, no reasonable, sensible person believes in aliens, etc. Well, I'm here to tell you that's not the case. In 1995, when I attended the MUFON Symposium in Seattle, I found out that most of the people that I met there were from all walks of life. And that's another truth about UFO encounters, a statement that needs to be made. People who see UFOs or who have encounters of one kind or another are not kooks, nuts, drug addicts, alcoholics, weirdos, spaced out people, whatever you want to call them. There may be a few of those who have encounters.
Yeah, I want to say something about that. It's not that you just get up one morning and says, today I'm going to have an encounter. It's like we talked about the spear being in the right place at the wrong time.
Exactly.
And so you can't kind of plan this.
They are absolutely normal people going about their business. They walk around a corner and suddenly they find themselves in an event that is so strange that it has no normal context in which to put the event. And this has a lot of different effects on people. Some people it's shattering. Some people put up the blinders and pretend it didn't happen. Some people do end up resorting to drugs and alcohol as a result of their paranormal experiences.
I like to add something to this. This is a large subject. And I don't think we can cramp it all in the time that we have allowed for ourselves. So can we talk about David Chase's book for a minute? Because I really don't think we're going to do the slideshow today. They just have to tune in the next time.
That may very well be possible. And it might be actually better to do it that way, that we have this time to do a background and build up to the presentation of some more substantial evidence. This gentleman, David Chase, I've met him several times. He's a fascinating artist. And I've also found that every time I've asked this man a question, he had an excellent answer for me immediately. And he does all of these drawings, and what these drawings are they're of the basic types of extraterrestrial beings that people are reporting all over the world. The reptilians, the Nordics, the Greys, the mantis types. You would think that if all of this was an illusion and there was no reality to any of these events, that there would be as many different types of aliens as there would be people experiencing them.
I was in Greenville, and a woman and her 4 children asked me to come over, and they thought I was having nightmares, And so then after I got there, one would start the dream, and another person ended, and I found David Chase's book real helpful to put a face on some of those beings that we see. May I see the one,
Certainly.
the mantis? That's my favorite.
He has
I
an
think.
extraordinary talent.
He's just wonderful. Okay, I'll find it.
Well, while you're looking for that
Yeah.
drawing, the point that I was trying to make was that some alien abduction experts have pointed out that the accounts that they are getting from people are almost boring in their repetitive sequence of events and the types of beings and situations in which these abductions are occurring. And I know that the word alien abduction, to people who are not well versed in this subject, that immediately sets the hair up on the back of their neck, and they think, you know, who is this kook and why is he talking about it? I would refer them to the work of a man named John Mack.
Oh yeah, that's even better.
Exactly.
I can find him anyway.
Who has
so.
multiple degrees and is on the board in charge of psychiatry for the Harvard Medical School, and he spent the better part of 2 years in a civil suit defending his job simply because he wrote a book called Abduction. And he said that people who are involved in the subject of alien abduction, the victims of this, they are not people who are suffering from any kind of break with reality. They're not psychotics. These are people who have been subjected to some kind of extraordinary external event.
And people of high strangeness.
If-
So we should kind of leave there as a cliffhanger. What would you say?
I think that would be perfect.
I can find the mantis in here, so maybe I was mistaken as
Well, I'm
to
quite sure that he's in here.
as to whose book he is in.
We do have some extraordinary pictures in here, like the reptilian. That's one that's frequently reported, a rather ominous type of alien being. I'm not quite sure how we're going to fit this in, but one of the things that I do need to focus on is that there was one very peculiar document that was obtained in the Freedom of Information Act from the National Security Agency. And it was a briefing paper. And the beauty of this briefing paper is that it basically does my job for me. And it's nice to know that my tax dollars are well spent and that the National Security Agency is helping me to prepare my UFO lectures. I really appreciate their assistance. They had a briefing paper in amongst all this other stuff. Of course, a lot of the stuff they got from the National Security Agency under Freedom of Information Act, you would get one piece of paper and all of it is blacked out. They tell you nothing. They just give you the piece of paper with the page number on the bottom. It's all black, and they say, well, this is all we're allowed to tell you. But they did have a briefing paper, and it was written in 1968, and they had 5 possibilities for what UFOs are. Number 1, they said, what if all UFOs are hoaxes? They dismissed that as a possibility. They said hoaxes in history have a low frequency of occurrence. They're seldom perpetrated by reputable people. And the UFO phenomena has been shown to be exactly opposite to that. It's worldwide. There are increased reports from all area, and the witnesses are highly credible. In fact, I've even spoken to witnesses who were in the military. I even got a great UFO story from an FBI agent. Hypothesis 2, all UFOs are hallucinations. They said that doesn't match the cases where the witnesses and equipment agree. Examples are when UFOs decide to let themselves be seen on radar and when UFOs are photographed by gun cameras. Mm-hmm. I would add just parenthetically that gun camera film by aircraft that were sent over the United States in the 50s and 60s is still classified, even though the camera, the film, and the aircraft have all been replaced by 50 superior models since then. We're still not allowed to see that gun camera film because some of those flights were deliberately sent out to see if they could contact UFOs. Possibility 3, all UFOs are natural phenomena. If you hear about a man named Philip Klass and an organization called PSYCOP, they will tell you that that's all that UFOs are. Now, the NSA pointed out that if that was true, that raised some very dangerous questions about our ability to discern the difference between incoming missiles, an enemy attack, and any other event that might occur. They didn't think that that was true because trained observers, as in their own people, the military, airline pilots, police officers, and I could go on, have observed UFOs as apparently solid objects that travel at extremely high speeds. They are high-performance vehicles, and they operate at altitudes in ways that most other aircraft can't and don't. And they can defy radar at will and also create electromagnetic interference. So they said that doesn't work. Number 4, and they only spent about 2 little sentences on this one, they said that UFOs are secret Earth projects. Well, you got to bear in mind whose briefing paper this is. This is the National Security Agency. They're not about to talk about that because if there is a secret Earth project that can fly like that, they're probably flying it or they know all about it. Their job is to know what everybody in the world is doing.
And what we need to do now is kind of close off the show and tell everybody thank you and wind it up. And we're looking forward to our next project that we're going to tape right immediately after. And we're going to go into a slideshow that we set up for, and I think it's really wonderful that you came. I hope that you come and visit us again. And this wonderful presentation, and when you go home, just make sure you look up, and when you see something, you call me.
I certainly will.
Yeah, and you tell your lovely wife I said hello, and some of the friends in Aberdeen. Is anything you'd like to add? Do you have anybody you want to say hi to real quick, since we have a couple of minutes here?
No, just that I would invite anyone who has information anywhere who sees this tape, if they have any information about early events at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base or Roswell or anything like that, now is the time to come forward and go out in the open. There has never been a better time. Don't be afraid anymore.
Yeah. By the way, the phone number for the UFO hotline is 206-322-3000. If you see anything,
excuse me,
call
722-3000.
Oh, I'm sorry. You got the last word anyway. There you go. Thank you very much for joining.